and we've made a lot of progress since then. We're not talking about it. We're doing things. We're trying to get funding. We're putting infrastructure on the ground. We're working with carriers to increase the coverage. And so this really, what our vision is that this kind of takes that place. And again, the goal for this is to really be a quarterly update statewide where we can let everyone know what's going on, that perhaps haven't seen. And also to get feedback, again, from the stakeholders and from the carriers about what do we need to focus on. What's big. And I don't know if, John Gavin, are you on the phone? So I know one of the things we'll get to, and maybe Virgil, I'll pick on you since you're in the same area. One of the things that John Gavin from Delta and I were talking about was, this latest round of the FCC experiments, which we're going to get to after a while. There are some issues with, hey, my area should have more, more money, or why did my area not get any money, or this area got a lot of money, and what's going on, and who's making these decisions. I had a conversation in Phillips County that, she wasn't aware, and it's, once I explained things to her, she kind of understood, but it was kind of a shock to say, hey, why didn't Phelps County get any money, for this? And these other counties are getting all kinds of money. And so, John and I talked, John said, hey, I think we need to, figure something out to argue, present our case to things like the FCC or other programs as a state. And he asked me, he said, who's advocating for Colorado? If the FCC is making decisions on things, who's advocating for Colorado? I said, well, unfortunately, really no one right now because of our, local control. That really it's everyone needs to advocate for themselves, and we had some back and forth about, well, that really, if the town of Delta writes a letter, does that hold as much weight for the FCC as if the state of Colorado wrote a letter or argue for that? And I said probably not. And so that's one of the things too we want to talk about is how can we use these to kind of develop some ideas that when these big national issues come up, we can put together some some objectives or some generalized statements and say this is what's good for Colorado. We can argue, this is, things are different for Colorado. That's one of the things we've learned with the FirstNet project is, when they make decisions about telecom, they don't necessarily take into account the difficulties in getting, fiber and, towers, on 14,000 foot mountains. Those are some of the things we have to wrestle with. So those are some of the things we should argue. So that's another element that we can talk about is how do we advocate for our states. And so again, that's where I think for the nights, we wanted to move it from just sitting around talking to let's, really make it useful and focus and see what we can come out of it. So that's, we see this group as kind of taking over that role.
Yeah, I think one thing we need to keep our focus on too is the politics that are going to be involved with how these groups take place and the funds that are going to be available and what representatives of what counties and what different parts of the state are, carry the most weight. I think the next legislative session is going to focus a lot on broadband and how we get these pipes out to these rural areas so that, where we can build a network, sustainable network, number one, that people are going to use instead of these spotty networks that seem good out of the box, but a year later they're deteriorated or outdated and sometimes abandoned. So I think if you could keep us posted on some of the legislative issues that are coming up, some of the things that are going on the Hill, the Capitol. I believe you and Megan are probably a little bit closer to that than we are. You hear things in the hall, or water cooler, or whatever, but I know a lot of it's confidential, but some things that kind of guide us down that path instead of letting us do a lot of work or these groups getting down the road and get squished at the end. It's kind of disheartening. Most of these folks probably look back for the second time. So yeah, just
so we can say when we get to run that more. So.
Brian?
Yes.
Along with on those lines, I think that we recognize what the state of Colorado is doing about it, but also this is part of the national initiative. And so to our neighbors, those of us who are border counties, and is there any effort by Colorado to say associate with New Mexico or those efforts coordinating those right along the borders, or is that something
But we have not done that, but you're absolutely right. I'd say a lot of our counties do, border neighbors, so I don't know, I'm looking, so, about, what they're faced with is, for my backhaul, do I go to Albuquerque, or do I go to Denver, or do I go to Salt Lake? Two of those options are at stake, so I think that makes sense, when we think about that, so that's an excellent.
I'd like to say this. I think there's a lot of people who don't. I think a lot of us don't understand what's all available in all these different areas. Because today, there's virtually broadband available anywhere in the state. How do you go about it? And I know everybody's kind of got their own agendas, depending on the service that's being provided. The fact of the matter is, there is broadband available out there. And it's just how you get it and how it's delivered. And to what degree. I mean, it may not, some broadband services may not work for everything, but there's some that work really, really well and they're more cost effective. Some of the money if there's money available too, I think the question is, do you want to spend the money on infrastructure, or do you want to spend the money subsidizing customers on their broadband costs? There's two different ways to look.
And that's actually point. In terms of how we subsidize it, I think that's traditionally we have subsidized the customer. That's the high cost fund in traditional telecom. That's really what's happened is you subsidize the customer through either directly through the customer or through the company providing the service. But you subsidize that monthly operational cost. And I think the conversation even nationally has been is that the wisest way to use your subsidy? If you're going to subsidize, how do you subsidize? And I think a lot of the conversation nationwide has been, maybe we should subsidize the upfront costs. So rather than subsidize in perpetuity, that we subsidize the upfront costs, the capital costs, to reduce that and say, okay, after that, you're on your own. And that's a debate. And I think that's, there's folks on both sides. So I think that's a very valuable point to say is, as we have our money, and as David pointed out with the broadband board, what is the best way to use those monies? Obviously, we can try to sway, federal programs, the FCC. We can probably sway state programs even more. And then you've got the local level. If local governments, start looking at that, how do they do it? So I think that's a valuable discussion to have.
And I really think too that certain types of broadband, you're more efficient providing population, fiber or something like that's a more efficient way. But for somebody that's 10 miles off the grid, in my case, I'll advocate that satellite's a better way to do it. Okay.
Okay.
Brian?
Yes.
Can I just chime in real quick? This is Dan Lubar.
Yeah.
As a service provider, I just wanted to offer a few things. As a service provider, I spend a fair amount of time with some trade groups inside the Beltway area, and I just wanted to offer my personal observation that spending money to be aware of what's happening inside the Beltway is only valuable if you're doing it in an efficient manner. It would be my opinion that if you look around the United States, there's a lot of people in different states that are very good at knowing what's going on and conveying the information down in an appropriate way, and let me stress, appropriate way. I think it would be more useful for this organization to reach out to NARUC and others that are at a state level who really are our peers in the process of interpreting and tracking what happens in the Beltway, because to be honest, I feel that what happens in the Beltway is fully, in a lot of ways, disconnected from what happens in the states. NARUC, on the other hand, is a place where you would have commonalities and be able to learn a lot from the guys that are really good already at getting information from inside the Beltway. So I just wanted to offer that as an observation. Thank you.
So basically, you're saying perhaps have some updates from folks. I know Lynn from the PUC is very involved in the neighborhood. So some presentations about talk about what is the thoughts at a national level, and try to synchronize our efforts with what we see coming down the pipe at a national level. Is that basically what you're saying, Dan?
Yeah, I'm not going to say synchronize efforts. I'm going to say find commonalities and get good sources of information that are going to well, aren't going to take money and throw it into the Beltway maelstrom of attorneys. I'll just leave it at that.
Can you, for those who might not know, say who NARUC is?
Oh, yeah, I think NARUC is the National Association of Regulatory Utilities Commissions. Basically, it's all the PUCs around the country. And it's a very established organization. Obviously, they regulate more than telecom. They have utilities and transportation, all that stuff. But basically, they get together 2 or 3 times a year and really have some outstanding meetings, and they get very deep into what are the technical issues, and so on and so forth. As I said, Linda Terriani with the PUC, who's our telecom section chief, is very involved with that and an outstanding resource. So that's an excellent idea. And one thing I'm going to throw out is that, at these meetings, we've had a lot of our federal representatives, either senators or representatives, they're folks here. And that's, I've had conversations with different offices, and that's, one of the things, that, again, as John and I were talking, John Gavin and I were talking, is, how do we engage? Obviously, that's potentially our most powerful way to influence federal, movements, is to have our federal representatives, be there for us. And we've developed some outstanding relationships with folks at OIT. I know different parts of the air state have good relationships with their federal representatives. So I guess to me, that's something that I would throw out is that something we want to look into, is creating some kind of mechanism where we can have a more focused conversation with our federal representatives, versus having them show up here, a couple of them here, a couple of them here, get bits and pieces of conversation. Do we think we want to try to set up something where we can sit down with our federal representatives, more present a case to them and say, this is what we need in Colorado, this is how it affects. So I guess that's how I would throw it out for conversation. Is that something you would like us as OIT to pursue, is, formalizing that relationship and making it a bit more structured with those folks?
Yeah, I think that's the shortest point between A and B, right there. And I'm sure we'll talk later on about this, but we're engaging our congressional delegation all the time. And we are investing in DC lawyers as well as Colorado lawyers to make sure this money keeps coming out. So, yeah.
I've got a question. I've been to a few of these meetings. Are we going to try and put something together from these meetings of what we need to do, a manual or anything like that? Because I'm on the state water board too. It's a statewide water pilot initiative, and we're putting together whatever is needed throughout the state. We're sitting here talking a lot, but I'm not sure, are we going to produce anything that we can use on how to bring broadband, how to light up the dark fiber in rural communities like this, and continue to talk? Because I think if we go to our federal representatives right now, we don't have anything to really discuss.
Yes.
Hey, Brian, this is Jeff.
Yes.
Did you want me to talk about what I'm working on currently?
Go ahead, Jeff. Yeah.
Okay, so, one of the things I'm working on right now with Governor Hickenlooper, before Mountain Connect, I had asked him why Colorado doesn't operate in some ways like a lot of other states in terms of using our state-owned and managed telecommunication assets. And so I was asked to be more, obviously be more specific in executive summary, and that, he would review it and look at it. And so we met a couple weeks ago, and I did that. And in my presentation to him, what I'm basically asking the state government to do is to put an entity in front of, and I'll give you 2 examples, CDOT and Public Safety, and allow that entity to negotiate commercial contracts where it's appropriate and where there's excess capacity in dark fiber, for example, within this state. And, that's a very simplistic description of what I'm putting together, because I'm also putting together sort of a white paper for for Governor Hickenlooper, which will explain how we get this done statewide. And what I have been doing for the last 2 months is talking to other states where this is working really well, because from my perspective, it's not the solution, but it is one way that we can reduce infrastructure costs in this state in terms of seeking federal additional state dollars if we can use what we currently have. Now, in my opinion, it is also valuable to look at CDOT dark fiber, because where it may not reach, can you extend laterals into it? And what kind of benefits does that bring communities who have the opportunity to build a lateral into existing infrastructure? So that's effectively what I'm doing at the moment, trying to get this white paper completed and then go back up there to Denver and present it to the governor. And of course, a lot hinges on this election, because I have a feeling that if he doesn't get reelected, then this conversation will have to start anew. But I can tell you that this type of an idea is working very well in other states in across the country. And one other thing I wanted to mention that I think is very important in these meetings is that we come up with some standardization for best practices and lessons learned for all of our local technology planning teams. Because right now we don't have.
Jeff, you're cutting out.
I was just saying that we need a best practices policy and a lessons learned policy for all of our local technology planning teams. Because right now, we're feeling a lot of people are just doing their own thing. We don't have a lot of synergistic efforts.
Yeah, Jeff, what states are you looking at that you think are close enough to Colorado to mirror some of their best practices? This is Wendell. Sorry, I'm late joining the conversation.
That's okay. Utah, Arizona would be the two closest, but more specifically, I'm looking really in depth at Maryland right now, as well as Maine. So some other places on the East Coast where they already have been doing this for a while. So I'm having some other discussions with those folks right now in terms of how do I lay this out and what's the best way to move this forward based on their own their own best practices in this area, as well as what kind of lessons have they learned throughout the process, so that we're not reinventing the wheel here.
Yeah, this is Phil Buckland at Clear Creek County, and just want to support what Jeff's been working on. And I too have been working with Roxanne White, Chief of Staff of the Hickenlooper and CDOT, and also with the Bob Beaupre campaign, also just in case, whichever way it goes. I think this approach has a lot to offer for the whole state, and I just want to say I want to thank Jeff, and I think that's a worth a lot more effort and best practices in a white paper. So let's keep up that effort. Thank you, Jeff.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
This is Connie McLean from Gilpin County, and I totally support Jeff as well. Thank you.
So, Bill, you're saying you're playing both sides?
Maybe
I'll talk to anybody that'll listen to me.
Yes.
Yeah, I think this is Wendell. I think one of the best practices that we ought to continue that transcends any election is what you've been doing at the Mountain Connect conference. And so I would hate to lose momentum, Jeff, and relying on, frankly, the government to solve the problem. I think that the local technology planning teams through the regional efforts was supposedly the tool to get some better coordination and planning available. And I know in our region we're identifying projects, and I think maybe having that project focus that is unique to each community and region, having a list of those projects and seeing how you kind of knit those together might be, an approach to take, because I think every community is different, and unless somebody's going to come in and solve all our problems for us, I think it's going to be up to each community to figure that out. And I think Mountain Connect has been one of the best resources that has ever come about to do that.
Well, Wendell, I will tell you that Mountain Connect this next year will grow bigger than it was last year. And in fact, one of the reasons why I brought this up is because I'm not suggesting that the work I'm trying to accomplish is the answer. It's part of the answer. And I think we need to make sure that all our bases are covered. And why would we not consider using existing assets where it makes sense to, instead of, spinning our wheels on grant funding, for example? There's some value. And again, it's not going to solve all the problems, but by golly, if it solves one community's issues, then we've accomplished something.
Yeah, we gotta come to the room real quick.
What's that?
Is healthcare.
Okay.
If I was talking about a project for 3 years, somebody would have to stand me. Usually you have a plan, you follow through, and you evaluate the effectiveness of that plan. So as I see these meetings, we need a basic outline of what the goal of the meeting would be, and act on it and attack it aggressively. And otherwise, we're just sitting around chatting. I mean, I can't believe you've been talking about this for 3 years. It's astounding, and it probably was longer than that. And I'm not saying it's anybody's fault, it's a complex issue. But we have businesses leaving our area because they can't get fiber optic internet access. And we're losing economic development because we can't get them the internet access they need to have their businesses survive. So we need resuscitation, and we need it now. And to have an outline meeting and focus the meeting on certain specific topics at each meeting, I think would really help. And at the end of each meeting, you have a wrap-up session, print out, document what decisions were made, and then at the next meeting you evaluate those decisions. But that's the way I would see progress starting to happen, because 3 years to discuss something seems kind of wacky. But I'm just in this and go back to this meeting.
Yes. No, I think that's it's a valid point, and I think one of the problems with telecom, I think the carriers on the phone in the room would attest. Unfortunately, when you're talking about the capital nature of some of these projects, they plan out. I don't know. Mike Nelson from Comcast, how far out? I mean, do you guys plan your large scale capital projects? How far down the road do you guys look?
About 3 years.
Yeah. So that's the problem. Is that Comcast already has in 3 years what they're going to spend on. They've already identified where they're going to spend their money 3 years down the road. So if we go to Comcast right now, the earliest they would say we can integrate that is 3 years. But that is one of the problems we have with this, is that the massive intensive capital nature of this is you've got to have those long-term plans. And so that's why we started these regional plans, and we will. I'll then get to that. We have talked about a state plan. We really weren't sure if that's something people wanted us to focus on. So it sounds like it is. So we'll talk about that after we do our quick roundtable. But that's part of the core of this, is that we're kind of in a conundrum where things are moving incredibly rapidly, and the needs are growing exponentially. And yet the nature of this technology is it is incredibly difficult to put in and get in place, just because of the nature of what we have to do to get to these rural areas. So but I think that's a good, excellent points.
Hey, Brian, it's Dan Lubar. Really quickly, I just wanted to, since we're not in the room, those on the phone, who was the woman who mentioned the ideas of trying to have each meeting focused and sort of do a playback at the next meeting? Because that was a set of good ideas. That's number one. Number two, I just wanted to come back to what Jeff had said earlier. And before I do that, I totally agree with you in the context of planning, but I also know, and I think you do too, that there are ways to more quickly address dire needs if you have a little more access to information and funding. But
Yes.
the thing that Jeff mentioned about Maryland, I just wanted to ask Jeff, if you're still on the line, Mid-Atlantic Broadband is the big success story in that part of the world. Do you really see there being a parallel with a state like Maryland and a state like Colorado with our fairly unique challenges? I would dare say that the Western states are probably more of a good reflection of what we really do have up against us. So thanks.
Well, I'll point to a parallel example. At the last Mountain Connect, I brought in Phil Halstead from Illinois, and I did that on purpose because in some ways Illinois is leaps and bounds ahead of Colorado just from a legislative perspective. They don't have an SB 152, for example, standing in their way. And so to answer your question, I think, what I'm trying to accomplish is taking the best of what's out there from each state and seeing how that we can apply it here in Colorado, given the current construct of politics and everything else that we have to endure out here. I don't think there's, you can't plug and play with one, a state like Maryland and plug and play here, because then you'd have to understand, what kind of rules and legislation do they have in place that either allows or prevents them from doing or progressing broadband infrastructure. It's not an easy. And it's just like using CDOT fiber. There's a whole discussion around how do you, how should CDOT value assets? And, the part of the problem, I think, in some parts, historically, if you ask people who have tried the CDOT route, save maybe Comcast, if Mike's still on the call, but, the problem is that if you try to engage them today, either you may not get a return phone call, or if you can get engaged in a conversation, what you end up with is more expensive than what the market bears right now in terms of private sector choices. And so one of the things I think we need to focus on, where other states have done very well, is that are our state-owned, publicly owned assets, are they worth making money off of, or are they worth growing our communities? Because, some places put a high value on their assets, and understandably so, but is your return window, I think this is just part of a longer term discussion. What do we want to do as a state in terms of using our assets? Do we want to make a lot of money off of them? Or do we just want to recoup our cost over a certain period of time, but in the meantime, put a cost mechanism in place that's going to actually foster growth, economically speaking?
Well, this is Wendell, one of the aha moments I had this week with regard to CDOT, and this makes a lot of sense, but I never thought about it, is when you say CDOT, you really need to think about the planning regions, because each region maintains its own infrastructure, so to speak. So that you really have to do it region by region, and you have to know the manager of each region to know what's there. I don't think a map of the entire state exists, and maybe Brian, you can shed some light on that and the work that you try to do to identify all of it. But I learned that this week, and knowing CDOT from the perspective I've had, it makes a lot of sense.
Well, Wendell, it just depends on where the money has come to support their infrastructure. Is it federally funded or is it state funded? Because those two things have two different meanings behind them, and processes behind them as well.
Yeah, but I'm getting at a more basic level, that if you're in a county that is in a particular CDOT region, you're much more likely to have an understanding of where fiber is to the extent it exists at the regional level than going to the state level. And then you might run into the problem of, we don't even know where it is, if it exists. That's the only point I'm making, to try and access it. The policy certainly comes at a state level, but where it actually exists in the ground may only be known regionally.
Yeah.
So one of the things we're doing with this plan with the governor is, one of the other things I'm trying to do on the side, to your point, Wendell, which is a very good one, is to engage regional conversations. So, down here in Southwest Colorado, up near where Audrey lives and a couple other spots around the state. I'd like to have this discussion and attack this issue from the ground up as well, because I think it makes sense to, because we need to show some value regionally.
Yeah, and
Sorry, Brian, I didn't interrupt you.
Yeah, that's okay. I'll address the asset issue here afterwards in our update section. So we have had some conversations about that. So before we get to the roundtable, anyone else have ideas, comments about these meetings? What would make them a value to you?
Brett, what I just heard in this conversation, this is not the answer to your question, but what I just heard in this conversation is kind of an either-or mentality. And I don't think that one necessarily has precedence over the other as far as being efficacious for getting broadband to community. And so I like the idea of engaging congressional delegates in the Beltway. Again, we do engage lawyers in the Beltway as well as lawyers here in Colorado to make sure that the federal subsidy use act actually gets to Colorado. And that's probably some of you have heard that's been quite a struggle in the last year and a half as the FCC has tried to roll out the Health Connect fund. So those are all the kinds of leveraging that we can do, and I understand people's eagerness to get workbooks and pamphlets and marching orders, and I understand people's eagerness to have specific topics. But I find this general roundtable discussion very interesting because I'd like to know how we can leverage what we bring to this table. And so if we focus on a particular conversation, we may not be able to understand the bigger picture. I'm inclined to want to plan regionally and execute on a statewide agenda.
Yeah, and that's, that's always been our goal, is that there is no one element to solve this problem, or one approach. And, unfortunately, Megan and I are the strategy and planning staff for the whole state. So, we're somewhat resource limited. But that's why we've started to work with DOLA and do the regional planning on this, because, ultimately it's going to be you guys that really help us solve the problem. And we're just going to be, the guide through that. So that's why, it has taken us some time to build up this momentum, just because things were so scattered. And it's taken us some time to really coordinate locally and coordinate regionally. And now we're working on let's coordinate as a statewide effort. And so that's kind of our goal. But yeah, no, I think both are valuable. We need to, and I think as we get to some of our regional discussions about updates, some of those regions are doing that. They're saying, where do I need fiber? Where do I need last mile? Where do I need a new tower for wireless or for fixed wireless? Or, very specific, which is what needs to happen in those regions. But on the flip side, I think we do need to talk about these big things because, when you look at, I think one of the advantages of this FCC program is it's brought to light the realization that the big money is at a federal level. And the big money is going to continue to be at a federal level. And if we want some of that big money to come to our states, then we need to understand those, influence that, and say this is the way that you need to look at that big money to make what's best for Colorado. And that's one of the things that are missing. So, yes.
One of the things that this group should know is that our offices have regional directors in 8 or 9 parts of the state. So wherever you go throughout the state of Colorado, Senator Udall's office is available. And if and when we come to the point where you need help with talking to agencies like the FCC or writing a letter on your behalf for a project you're working on, that is something our office can offer, as well as letters of support for any of those kinds of grants that you might be applying for. You might keep that in mind when you're starting to do that level of engagement with grants and that sort of thing.
I just wanted to echo the comment here too, that I like some of the general discussion, because in the San Luis Valley we have issues with broadband just about everywhere. And, so Adams State University is pretty well set, but, the hospital 20 miles down the road is not. Half the schools in the area are not. The people in the fringes are not. And being able to pull all of these together, sure, we could bring, and there have been projects to do that, bring telemedicine into San Luis, and that's great. But that's where it stops. Nobody in San Luis outside of the hospital is benefiting from that. So having these types of
Can I speak to that too a little bit? Because we do provide broadband to San Luis. And when you say that's where it stops, you're absolutely right. They don't even, so many of these facilities, even if we can get a major line in there, they don't have redundancy. And so 2 weeks ago, the whole 719 LATA was out of our major service provider. We had hospitals having to transport patients to Pueblo because they couldn't access patient records because that one single line was down. And so the healthcare facilities can be anchor institutions for communities, but they can't do it alone. And they absolutely, we need to plan for lighting up this dark stuff, but we also need to plan for redundancy in this as well, because just one line doesn't get it done.
Yeah, we were fortunate 2 years ago, we finally got the link complete, essentially, and finally built 16 miles of fiber through Granite that was needed to solve our fence post issues.
Right.
Where, you know, I don't know how many times we had farmers or other providers or drive fence posts and fiber. Yeah, and took out all telecommunications in the San Luis Valley.
You know, you mentioned the hospital is completely out of broadband. We just put in a satellite link in Estes Park at the hospital there.
Sure.
Because they had lost during the floods and so forth, they lost connection. Now they have us as their redundant backup.
Yes, and we needed that because when Gary Hall, CIO at Estes Park, went down, we were on the phone with CenturyLink trying to get that. We couldn't even get helicopters to fly in and see where the cuts were during the flood because of the drains too. So they need redundancy. And if it's satellite, it's satellite, but there is that delay. And so you can do certain things over, things over satellite, and you can do other things that you have to have some sort of broadband or fiber.
You're absolutely right. We have 700 milliseconds of latency,
Right.
and
That's right.
unless you're really wanting really fast, you know.
Or you're delivering telenet.
Yep.
You have to have that.
Well, we can do video and all that kind of stuff.
With latency.
So any other comments about these meetings before we move on to the round table? Yes.
Yeah, Brian, Dan Lubar again from Grant County. I just wanted to mention one thing, if I may. Basically, the basic premise of redundancy and resiliency, I think everybody would agree that this group uniquely might be in a position to really focus on that. And I mean focus on that in the context of what Jeff was talking about. In a best practices context, there's local knowledge on the ground, the incumbent provider notwithstanding, and the ecosystem that they represent. Local communities are going to know on the ground the best resiliency and redundancy solution that exists for them. And that would be my, again, independent of the knowledge of where fiber is and things like that. So that's one thing. I wanted to make sure I mentioned one other thing though, Brian. I want to emphasize, as somebody who's a last mile provider and as somebody who knows the song and dance that goes on inside the Beltway, that everybody goes into any kind of an agenda with an FCC-focused mission, that they know that there are mixed possibilities at best, that a lot of what happens in the Beltway is backed by some serious money and serious influence. So that's why I suggested earlier, if we are going to try to do something with the commission, that we do it with a constituency of other states that creates a beneficial outcome to other states as well as ours. So that's the last piece I wanted to add. Thank you.
I would like to think that for 4 hours of investment here, I would suggest to you that it would be beneficial, since there's a number of statewide, regional strategic plans being completed during the next few months, that it would be beneficial for you to invite that region once they have their final plan and have them give a presentation about what they learned. Because that way I could listen to it and I would have learned from their perspective what's going to work, what's not going to work, and what they ought not touch. And that would be invaluable.
Great idea, Dale. And I'm actually going to use that to segue into the roundtable. So since you spoke up, Lee.
Can I just say a couple of words, Brian?
Yes.
I'm Lee Merkel with the regional broadband effort that DOLA has put forth as part of the local affairs, whose only customers are local governments and regional governments like South Central Cog. we're made up of local government. And we have a broadband initiative which is being done regionally. We are not defining regions. We allow whoever is interested in coming to us to ask for some assistance financially with the broadband study and analysis of what's there, what's needed, looking at alternatives to meeting those needs, but in an engaged process, a public process, we will assist with those. We have sort of defined regions as in Region 14, South Central Colorado, or Region 7, Pueblo, Region 6, which is Southeast Colorado, all of us, 6 counties east of Pueblo. But we aren't saying who needs to do it. You guys, counties can get together, regions can get together to pursue that. I just wanted to get that up. I'm going to have to duck out for a little bit, and I've got to answer a request from our Denver office, but I'll be back in about an hour. And Bill Gray, my office name here, is going to be available on table discussions. So I'm very interested in what you all would be interested in. Pursue it. And Pete should probably be in the middle of that discussion.
Excellent. Thanks, Lee. No, I'd like to point out, it's not too often you get to say multiple state agencies working together. So, but in this case, we are. So it's, I like to always point out that DOLA has been a great partner and all in it. So this is, one of the examples of government working together. So,
I don't know this tech speak, so you need to have the Megans and the Bryans in the world to be the real. All we're just money beat.
Yep. Okay. The world needs money, doesn't it? Okay, so with that, let's start giving some updates on the planning regions. And Dale and Wendell, since Bill's right here, Wendell, you're on the phone. Do one of you guys want to give an update about the Upper Ark planning region and kind of what you guys are seeing, what some of the issues you guys are dealing with?
Sure. I'll kick it off. I think I hear Dale and there may be some others there. But in Chaffee County, we just completed both a regional meeting with Paul, the regional consultant, and he was able to follow that up with 2 subsequent meetings with the city and town administrators of Salina and Buena Vista, who now have identified projects over the next 2 to 3 years that they will initiate to provide some infrastructure. I don't think they are ready yet to entertain the Senate Bill 152 question, but it's certainly in the back of their mind. But they're going to engage in some municipal networking to basically continue to support what it is we've gotten going here in Chaffee County. So I find that as kind of a positive development, and both are becoming more aware at a policy level of the need for broadband deployment. I met briefly yesterday with Ralph Abrams and Colorado Central Telecom. They are considering an FCC application for several areas, I think, that range from kind of the San Luis Valley to Lake County. So, Brian, I want to thank you for coming up a couple of weeks ago to give us that briefing. So that's kind of the update in Chaffee County. Other than I just want to put a fine point on the importance of broadband. We are pursuing a major out-of-state company that's identified our area for possible relocation, and they cited 2 reasons. One is health and wellness, and the second was internet. So, and that was in their proposal, or at least their solicitation of interested counties. So it does pay off in an economic development sense. And I guess lastly, is Mike Brazell or anybody from Park County on the phone? If not, on behalf of Park County, I want to invite everybody to Guppy on September the 30th from 11 to 1. We will be celebrating a successful deployment there of broadband that was a totally local effort in an area that literally is out in the middle of nowhere. We managed through a charter school and some support from the county and some grant funding to get deployment into Guppy, which is a town of about 400 people, and specifically to the charter school as an anchor institution. I think it's a real win. So 11 to 1 in Guppy on September the 30th. And that's my report.
Excellent. Can you talk a little bit on your regional planning? Can you talk a little bit about what your region is focusing on, how you guys are approaching your planning effort, and what your goals are?
Well, let me pass it over to my wingman, Dale Mullet. He's at the table, I think.
All right, Wendell, I'll take that. Upper Ark, plus Walton, we have Park, which is not part of Upper Ark, Lake, Chafee, Fremont, and Custer. In July, signed a contract to do a 5-year broadband strategic look ahead for what those 5 counties should do. We realized at the get-go that all 5 of those counties have a different solution, that there is no one solution that will satisfy all. So part of our contract calls for an overview of the technology, the goals of the country, et cetera, the goals of the state. And then we've got 5 sub-reports that are going to be underneath that. And that's due to be finalized and delivered to us after 2 or 3 iterations by 31 December of this year. So it's been a very interesting process. Personally, the 5 counties have made significant improvements from the beginning of this process in July to just now by shining a spotlight on this, by educating people to the understanding that the incumbents are not the only solution, and that in many cases there will have to be a federal, private, or a public-private solution. 152 is an obstacle, and there's ways to get around it. And so the education that comes out of these strategic plans, at least in our case, has been extremely worthwhile. And we will thank Noah, who's no longer here, and you guys for your help.
Excellent. Any questions for the Upper Arkansas folks?
The report is being done by Mid-States Consultants out of Utah, who is one of 5 companies that submitted for the work, and they won, they prevailed.
Brian, if I can jump in. Hey, Wendell, David Shipley. One of our central company, South Park, they actually worked with Park County on that project. And we were the last mile carrier to bring in that pipe into the school district. And just as something for folks to go forward, if you bring a solution or suggestion to the table to some of these planning committees, they're very receptive to hearing the plan. As long as you have it hearing your voice, as long as you have a solution or you have something to bring. I mean, in a lot of the Park County broadband forums, or cover a little bit of what I need, what you need, satellite versus fiber versus, DSL. I mean, they're all complementary services for different parts of the territory, and I think they all work together. So going into these projects, I think I could suggest or recommend bringing a solution to the table, and you'll still be at the table at the end of the day, because you're usually let will probably be the solution that these rural areas choose.
Can I just echo on that? And Dave, I didn't know you were sitting there. I would have acknowledged you, but Dave is an example of a carrier that cooperated once we identified a goal and tried to come up with a solution. And they've donated their time and equipment and money, frankly, to make this happen. But I think that's the way it gets done. And I absolutely agree that you need to have a carrier at the table. And he won't say this about himself, but Dave and I have gone back a ways. But I think the more interesting thing for this group is both Dave Shipley and Mike Brazel, the county commissioner, will be 2 of the 13 members on, I think, the broadband deployment board. So you got some key voices, in this area. And congratulations, Dave.
Thank you, Wendell.
Yeah, and I think what, that example to me is what we hope to get out of this process. At first, we got a lot of pushback as, you're trying to, pit the carriers and the public folks against each other and this and that. And our vision all along has been the solution is going to be to work together. That there's, especially in the rural parts of the state, a pure market versus a pure municipal type solution. Yeah, there might be some of those here and there, but the majority of things are going to be public-private partnerships working with what's out there. That's just that education. So I'm glad that's happening, because that's been our goal, is to get folks to sit at the table together and realize what is there, what is possible. I was talking with someone, I can't remember who it was, and they're even there's a chance that we may even get Redcliffe hooked up. you know, and I think those of you that know where Red Cliff is, it is one of the most inaccessible spots in the state. There's actually a glimmer of hope to getting Red Cliff, you know, broadband. And so that's, you know, to me, those, and really all it is about people talking to each other and realizing, you know, that a certain asset that was put in place for one purpose can be used for a different purpose and those sorts of things. So that's really what our goal's been. So any questions for the Arkansas folks before we move on? Okay, well, the next, since Virgil, you're sitting right here, Virgil, you're going to get an update on Region 10. So Region 10 is essentially Delta, Montrose, Gunnison, San Miguel, and Ouray.
And Hinsdale.
And Hinsdale.
Can't forget Hinsdale. And I think Michelle's on the phone. Michelle, do you want me to take the lead on this?
I think that'd be easier if you don't mind.
Okay, be happy to. Please fill in any gaps. So Region 10, as you heard, is a 6-county region, southwest Colorado. We are a extremely mountainous region. Montrose and Delta are probably the largest communities. Gunnison in Gunnison County is up there as well. We came together with the assistance of DOLA to do an implementation planning project. We issued an RFP and had great response from that. The successful consultant that we chose is NeoFiber. Many of you have probably heard Diane Cruz speak. Diane has spoken at Mountain Connect even last year. They are located out of Glenwood Springs. We liked their breadth of experience, and we felt that it was a complement to some of the challenges we have in Region 10. We've hit the ground running with this project. I think it was last week or the week before we started having meetings, community anchor institution meetings. We had a general kickoff meeting, and probably the most successful or exciting meeting that we started out on the very first day of the process. We brought all of the providers together that everyone we can think of that should be on that list was invited, and we had a pretty good room. All of the incumbents were there, as well as local and regional independent folks. And so it was a great conversation. I think a lot of wisdom in bringing them in early. We've heard this discussion where we need them as a part of the solution. And by bringing them in early, I think that eased their mind that we really do want to work with them. And we really do. We see them as part of the solution. So it was a great set of meetings. We're continuing those in the next couple months. We're doing individual, I think our approach probably similar to Upper Ark. We're looking at each community, each county as a different set of problems and a different set of solutions. That we have some areas that we envision fixed wireless. In Montrose, we think fiber. It's a fairly urban area in the city of Montrose, but we've got a lot of wireless ISP, so fixed wireless out in our unincorporated areas. We've got some interregional issues of getting connected and building redundant paths. For instance, now Gunnison is connected with fiber, and as you drive between Montrose and Gunnison, you see this little orange pipe where the water is washed out where this underground conduit was laid. That is Gunnison's connection to the world. And so we need to help them find ways to connect to the east, as well as getting folks like Hinsdale County, which have probably less than 1,000 residents in the whole county, get them connected. We've got places much like Red Cliff, Ophir, Colorado, is one of those areas that can't hardly get dial tone, let alone broadband. And so we're looking at ways of that there is a power line that runs right up over the pass there. And so we're hoping to find ways that we could work with the electric companies to drop a fiber into Ophir. So lots of different things happening. We expect this process to to run over the next 9 months. And we were very clear with our consultant that we want an implementation plan. We've studied, we've planned, we've done the aggregation questionnaires. We want to take and drop something into each community that they can actually then bid out and get some work done. So that's our solution there. Brian, I don't know, Montrose is we're working and coordinating with Region 10. We also have some things going, and I don't know if you want me to cover it now. So the city of Montrose, and Michelle, before I jump in, did I state everything properly?
I think you covered it quite well. Thank you.
And maybe before I did want to mention the CAF2 funding that you alluded to earlier, Brian. Montrose and Delta counties pretty much were left out of that funding for a variety of reasons. We do have some independent telephone providers in our area that those funds were not allocated in service areas for those folks, which some of the areas that we really need to serve. But the other 4 counties, specifically, I think 3 of the other counties actually have some pretty good funds available to them. So we're looking forward to taking advantage of that. On the Montrose side of things, most of you are probably aware Montrose was the 3rd city in the state that successfully passed an exemption, had an exemption vote for Senate Bill 152. Our vote passed by a 3-to-1 margin. We look at that as a mandate from our citizens that we need to do something. On the Net Index Explorer from when you run speed tests, if you look at the metrics for Colorado, Montrose ranks 51st, I think probably out of 61 ranked communities. So we are way back there in the pack, and we don't see ourselves in that position. We want to be up towards the front. That's our goal. We want to be a leader in the state. And so we're doing what we can to make that happen. We're also a pay-as-you-go community. We have very, very little debt. And so the approach that we're taking, rather than what we've seen others, we're not interested really in doing a large revenue bond issue. We want to do everything we can to implement Dig Once policies. We want to hear from our providers. I think probably what you're going to see from Montrose is we'll be looking at how we can work with the providers to extend our base network, our core network, out into the community that they can build off of. So we'll pool our CapEx funding, and we will try to move this network forward with cooperation of our providers. And we got some great local providers as well as our incumbents. And there's a lot of interest in what's happening in Montrose, and folks are coming to us, knocking on our door, and wanting to know how they can help. And so we think we're going to make stuff happen.
Is your issue as far as, you mentioned you're 51st?
51st in the state as far as download speed.
So I would assume that your issue is middle mile. Or is it the last mile?
Actually, we have pretty good middle mile service. It's the last mile. Yeah. We have CenturyLink and Charter.
So what are the speeds?
I believe, if you can believe this, I think they're around 6 meg down. We you know, on our map it shows we have 30 meg coverage throughout our cable providers network, which I beg to differ. It's there somewhere. Maybe if they did, I don't know.
Any questions for Virgil or Michelle? Do you have anything to add?
No, thank you.
Okay, we'll move to the table, Candace, since you're here. Region 5. So Region 5, basically the central eastern plains.
Right, we covered the territory known as Elbert County, Kit Carson, Lincoln, and Cheyenne counties, with our region, the council of governments. You probably all met Jo Downey. She was at your previous meeting. She just had to be out of the state this week, so I'm filling in. We actually have been requested by DOLA to pursue the broadband initiative, so we took it to our COG council, and we had some providers at that COG meeting and made a decision that we would go ahead and pursue the broadband planning. So we have requested proposals. We had 6 submitters. We chose Mid-States Consulting also. We are currently in the process of applying to DOLA for funding for that before we go out and do any other work. We would like to get our funding in place and have the cost. We would like the other basically 25% to come from a collaborative effort from our providers in our area. We have several small telcos in our area, in our service area, as well as a couple of major ones. Then we also have some ISPs that had come to the table and want to be included. We have some redundancy. One of the local telephone companies has reached their redundancy point all the way up into northeastern Colorado, into the Sterling area, which has been very beneficial in helping our area, specifically Kit Carson and Lincoln counties, because that's where their major area is. They also have one location closer up to the city near Bennett. So anyway, that's where our redundancy loop is right now with that one small company. And we do have some locations that are actually CenturyLink customers. And we have a couple of small ones, small telcos. Anyway, we continue to work towards that. We're hoping that within the next maybe 4 to 5 weeks, we'll have some sort of agreement with DOLA, and therefore we can go ahead and start bringing together our main committee or our working group and see if we can't get some of the providers as well as board members, the school districts. We have a couple of community colleges in our area. We'd like to bring those people into the loop, and as well as the telemedicine in the health care industry.
And I think Kit's a great point, and this was the same as we'll get Darlene next in the far northeast. But you know, one of the things that I thought was great was when we first went out there, and the carriers were in the room. You know, the local government and the stakeholders looked at them and said, "Are you guys going to participate in this with us? Because you're going to get benefit out of this. We're going to, it's going to be joint." And the carriers said yes, and I think they even talked about funding up some of the funds to do this. And I thought it was a fantastic example that, I think everyone sat in the room and realized that everyone was going to get a benefit from this process. And, that's probably the earliest I've seen in this process. I think Virgil and Wendell talked about after they kind of got going, they invited the carriers in. In this case, the carriers were in the room from day one and really an integrated part. So I thought that was an excellent example of working together. So that's, I applaud them for that. So. Any questions?
I'm sorry. Kit, I'm sorry.
Kansas,
I'm sorry. You're very fortunate because you have a lot of rural carriers in your area. I mean, you've got the Eastern Slope. And, I know them well. I know them well. But from what I understand, did EagleNet go in there?
Yeah, and that is there.
So what's, I guess I'm trying to get my arms around this as far as facilities you got.
Well, we do have some issues with EagleNet. There is in some areas, there's no connectivity to them. I believe there's been some issues with the last mile connections. They came in, EagleNet came in, and I think I've heard this from other areas as well, that they came in and dropped in lines where there were already lines and coverage, and therefore people were already connected. So basically, it's not being used because it's overbuilt. There's too much.
Eastern Slope, Plains, Wiggins, Roggins, Nunn, they're all tied into the CCT as well, correct?
Yes.
Should be in pretty good shape over there.
Well, we have horrible problems even at our hospitals with the connectivity there, and then with the schools going into the new requirements for testing. Some of those seem to be pretty good, but not all.
So mostly last mile stuff?
I think those are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Darlene, are you still on the phone?
I am.
You
Good
want to talk about Region 6?
Sure. Unfortunately, Brian, on the regional level, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay. On the regional level, things have certainly not moved very quickly. We have done our RFP. We have extended that offer to hire mid-states, and our holdup now is just waiting for the confirmation from DOLA for the funding. Each one of the 6 counties here are providing the match for that grant. So hopefully we will hear from DOLA soon and be able to move forward with the regional plan. On a bit more local level here in Yuma County, the City of Yuma, City of Ray, and County of Yuma are all moving forward with sponsoring a question on the ballot this fall to opt out of Senate Bill 152. So although we haven't seen a great deal of pushback just yet, we really do have a extended educational campaign underway. Have a great committee lined up and funding has been raised, calling themselves the Better Internet for Yuma County Committee. So a letter to the editor campaign has been done, many letters of support and presentations are scheduled. So that's been really keeping us as busy for the last month and will through the first part of November.
Excellent. So Region, actually I misspoke. Region 1 is essentially the far northeast corner, Washington, Yuma, Phillips, Sedgwick, Morgan. Who am I missing?
Logan?
Logan, yes. Logan counties, yes. Okay, I think our last regional efforts that's active. Nate, you wanna talk about Northwest? You still on the phone, Nate?
You might have dropped off and said you.
Yeah, Brian. Yes, Brian, I'm here. Sorry.
Okay.
had to get the mute button on the cell phone. Hey, first of all, thank you for putting the conference together again, Megan, Brian. Great effort. And as you mentioned, thank you for the shout out on the broadband workshop. I thought it really was an extraordinary opportunity for us to bring together the governmental entities, talk about our challenges, and then bring the providers in to talk about our challenges and understand what their challenges are and how they start to, what their challenges are and their hurdles in general for broadband deployment in terms of, our region and business case and infrastructure that's available, and of course, population density and topography always in rural Colorado seem to really have a big impact. In general, what we've been focused on is working directly with service providers on some specific projects in partnership with local government to try to bring together and enhance a public-private partnership and good relationships so that whether the providers are going to fund it themselves or they're going to go after FCC money or a local government is going to try to go after and procure and provide some kind of local or regional funding for a project. That seems to be driving a number of our projects forward slowly in incremental steps, but we are making progress, and that's really great. Regarding SB 152, and I apologize for the background noise. I'm actually at a statewide into their management team conference, so you may hear some noise in the background. Rio Blanco County and the town of Red Cliff both have said that they are they have SB 152 exemption referendums on their ballot. Pitkin County, while they considered it, doesn't believe they need it because they already went to their voters a number of years ago and talked about and asked them for permission to use their translator funding to also apply to broadband. So they really don't think they need they don't have an issue at this time. I do want to recognize the efforts that Audrey Danner's gone to, working with Moffat County and the Moffat County Commissioners to try to work on consideration of whether they want to put an SB 152 exemption resolution on their ballot. A couple of the big items that I've been working on, and certainly the earlier conversation about fiber, and whether it's lit fiber or dark fiber and access to it and knowledge of location is an enormous critical piece to this puzzle. And it's the efforts to identify this fiber and the interest from communities is now starting to roll to me, even from individual citizens and groups of business people within the regions, and they're asking, what is it that we can do to gain access to this fiber that we know is in the ground? We see the markers. We're watching them put it in, especially along I-70 with the enormous fiber project that's going on there. And they really want to know what's going on with this critical piece of infrastructure. So I think there's really increased pressure, I think, from the general public to gain access to what they see is a valuable resource. And they're kind of boggled in many ways as to why the providers won't tell us where the fiber is because it's critical infrastructure, and why we can't get access to it necessarily. Sure, maybe you have to backhaul from a certain location, but how come we can't get a centralized database? We know there's fiber markers in the ground, so come on, industry. It's the public is starting to say in our region, it's no secret that this fiber is there. It's there, so just tell us where it is. Tell us how we can access it, and let's figure out a way to monetize it so that everybody can make money and everybody can have connectivity, and we can increase the business prosperity in our region utilizing this resource. One of the other shout outs I have is Brian. Thank you very much for talking with some of the CLECs in my region about the composition of CenturyLink and the way they've configured their companies and their operating companies in Colorado. Certainly, when I talked with one of our IT directors, he said that he's actually having pricing challenges because he can buy a link from Denver to one city in his county. When he makes the jump and tries to just go 2 municipalities over, the price for the link quadruples because he's crossing 2 CenturyLink companies, and he's really frustrated, and he's kind of throwing up his hands saying, well, how am I supposed to get connectivity that's affordable if I can't really navigate this model because it's not price competitive at that point necessarily. So he's also looking for solutions. So there may be some more efforts and some more things that we need to talk about. In general, one of the other things that I'm working on is trying to reach out to some of the carriers where we have broadband into a central area and there's fiber to a cell tower, and they have great cell phone, and they have great wireless coverage. I'm talking, when I say great, I mean 20, 30, 40 megabits per second download, 5 to 15 up. I'm trying to talk to them and trying to get interest in doing whatever their plan is, plus rural for a component, to try to sell them on the idea of maybe they can be a last mile provider in regions where their assets aren't necessarily used fully at this point, or they want to enhance their infrastructure there. So starting those conversations with them and trying to create some interest there. So certainly any support or interest from other regions would be, I'd be interested in hearing from you. Regional highlights at this point on some of the projects, because I'm really action and project oriented at this point. Rio Blanco County just closed their RFP. It was an extensive RFP. It was great effort by Rio Blanco County. They had 11 respondents to their RFP, and they're going through the responses now. Pitkin County will be releasing their RFP on the street within the next 10 days. And in an effort to really take this more regional and have a more regional viewpoint on this, certainly because of where Pitkin County is located, they're looking to watch out for towns to the south of them, like Marble, across the county line, and also certainly some of their served markets or markets that could be served are also in Eagle County as well. So they're really looking at their RFP and trying to not just look out for Pitkin County, but also incorporate some of the other towns and regions that are just outside or adjacent to their region. Brian, you mentioned the town of Red Cliff, and it's really bringing me in. And I do want to talk to our partners to the south in the Upper Arkansas area, because we are working on a cross-county border solution because it's one of the only ways in leveraging a provider's existing relationships and network connectivity across the county line, but within a line of sight wireless shot right down into the town of Red Cliff. It's looking good. I was up Monday on top of the hillside helping to take down some trees on some private property and gaining access to the site and helping them prepare the site for the wireless experiment. We're going to try by the end of October. The provider is going to try to have at least a quote unquote experimental test link that will be established. That'll probably be up through the winter while we put the final business plans together, while we wait for the town's decision on SB 152 and to gain access to grant funding to put a permanent solution in place. So that's about it for my region. Those are the highlights. And Brian, and Megan, by the way, I'd be happy to send my monthly report out to you for distribution or posting to whatever other areas and regions are interested in looking at what we're doing and gaining benefit of some of the lessons learned that I usually put in my monthly reports. So that's it from the Northwest region. Thanks.
That'd be great, Nate. Any questions for Nate? Okay. I think those are all the regional efforts. We are pleased. Been working with the Pueblo. Pueblo is its own region.
San Luis Valley is.
Okay. We'll get something silly. But had an initial meeting with Pueblo. Pueblo's its own region, and they're very interested in doing a plan. And throughout, they said, well, why should we do it on our own? And so we're actually, looks like we might be doing some work with Region 14 in the Raton Basin area. So another good example of, neighbors working together to put something together. So I think we're going to have our first meeting on that here probably the next couple weeks. We'll get together for that. So, Senator Gonzalez, sorry.
Yeah, we're sort of excited. We put out an RFP for a strategic plan for the valley as a whole. Hoping we could, cooperate and build on each other's efforts as much as we could. That period just ended, and we should have a decision next week. Good. We had 7 respondents, so we'll see. We'll see next week. But basically, we're looking for inventory assessments, needs, identifying needs. So it's done through our council of governments. Okay. And we're so now that we actually have some redundancy into the valley, now we're going to get out to the fringes. Excellent. We have a lot of fringe. Yes.
Also, I'd like to report to you on Raton Basin efforts is that one of the things that we've done early on is identify and associated also with some the news that Eagle net was coming through, and so there was a big flurry of activity in identifying folks. We had providers, we had everything that we talked about, the institutions, people that came in, and then subsequently, of course, that the concrete development with them, say for, but in the interim, what we've done is we've identified within a series of meetings, we had at least 2-3 regional meetings for having the local technology teams, and we also have coordinated with the Morning Southeast through college, so bringing that to. We've got parts of some providers who are coming in and identifying regions. More importantly, I think, is that what we've done is, in working with our rational based counterparts over and this strong border over that's coming, finding out from some of our members there that the rural electric use of the lighting up that part 5 is picked up to all of these extremely rural areas. To Los Angeles County is the largest county landmass in the state. But we have the same difficulties with everybody, that we have little blocks, little patches, and that there are regions to just fall on them. And going up the, what we say, but so we have the strategic plan already in place with our rural based in economic development, find the goals for economic, for project activity, and specifically in areas for the environment, for the school requirements, as well as a real strong need and for the health issues. And it's hugely, as far as the remoteness and the difficulty of getting my doctors. The other aspect is, as well, I suggested earlier, is that we all recognize the need for private and fill these gaps by coming together along the gaps. But we also really recognize that not having the broadband connectivity and moving along for this effort is seriously impacting us economically. One takeaway from the Intermountain Connect was that the fact of these communities that we don't have to and we simply say one approach is going to fit all. We've got far too many regional landscape issues and more importantly, home issues. I would like to state that it was just a couple of months ago, before when Megan, Nell, and others were down the forefront association USDA. And the takeaway from that, for me anyway, was that it was really important, again, looking at different funding sources, looking at the utilities, and that we can, as we approach them on a national level, can bring that kind of method by USDA so that we can avail ourselves of at least the information surrounding the funding availability. Because there were a number of funding sources there that I found seeing. So as we approach the DOLA grant that and for the planning, we also are recognizing that there's some currently. I would like to see if anything that we just kind of completely put together all of the various possibilities of funding, whether it's via the USDA, the DOLA activities, and in some instances also some other federal aspects of it. And I know that our region is inclusive of the next one, so for that, it's not
What region are you in?
Region 14.
Where's that region?
It's Orange County.
Oh, this is 14. You're in it.
And Metro Basin actually includes Orange County, Mexico, and Los Angeles County, and Puerto Rico.
Well, you've got some independence in, Baca County, Baca Telephone Company.
Absolutely.
And you have Kim, Wright Telephone Company. We take it all the way up to Ontario. So there's a lot of connections there.
And we have had some joint meetings on not only this matter but on some other issues like so that, one of the things is that as regions we're seeing that we're not this region that stops, but it's whether it's connectivity or even the compressed natural gas fueling station efforts and doing that with the state, that we're regionally supportive of each other. We did also partner with Pueblo on the recent compressed natural gas fueling station. So we're seeing that those partnerships are getting stronger, and that we can do more by doing those kinds of partnerships, not only with the governments but also with the privates. We really need that.
Excellent. Just to add on to what I was saying in the valley, the San Luis Valley Rural Electric is running fiber to the home to support their smart meters, and they are going to build that as an open network for internet service. Nice. Yeah. Oh yeah. I want to move out of the city.
You also have Blanca Telephone Company and then Jay.
Have is an interesting word. They exist. Some places I think they offer broadband. In other places you can actually afford it. Maybe not. The problem we have is we either get expensive or too expensive for anyone in our poor counties to afford. So, there's I think we're going to talk about the digital learning. It's called out Swatch, the PDFs that were there, which is great. They do some great things, but the county is so poor. Once you get out of the school, nobody can afford to, get broadband. Now, Ralph Abrams has done some good work up there.
It's Cheryl with Colorado Central and Crestone Telecom. The Swatch school is now getting 80 meg download and 20 up.
Yeah. It's really great to see these schools, especially with the state requirements. But then what happens to the students when they go home? As more education that moves online, digital learning, Adams State offers full online master's degrees, and we have people in the valley who can't take advantage of it because they can't get connectivity to take care of it. So
a lot of those issues too are at the FCC, right? Because broadband is an information service and not a communication service, it's not supported. So therefore, like Brian mentioned, at some point, the federal government's going to have to either look at broadband and say this is a supported service, or not a supported service, or a portion of it is a supported service, so that your low-income folks can then go ahead and apply for low-income assistance. So there's a big disconnect there on on the FCC and states wanting all of us to go out and build these networks. We're moving from a TDM voice to an IP network, but yet nobody wants to support that backbone. So I think it's going to take some time to do that. But yeah, a lot of it could be taken care of a quasi-supported service, even if it was just a device at the house. Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts in this. It's right.
Can I just report out a little bit about what the Colorado Telehealth Network is doing? Right now, we have 195 sites connected throughout Colorado. Most of the hospitals and all of the behavioral health clinics are connected to the Colorado Telehealth Network. We intend to go after the safety net clinics in your communities, the mental health centers, and the FQHCs, Federal Qualified Health Centers. That is actually in the governor's health care agenda, that we're going to do that by Q4 of 2015. So in the next, 18 months or so, we expect to have another 200 sites connected to that. For those of you who know about the SIM grant, if indeed the state of Colorado does get that, and if indeed the current administration stays the current administration, we think that we'll have another 300 sites that we'll be able to connect. And all of those sites will be subsidizable through the FCC Health Connect Fund. And so facilities pay 35% of the cost, and the government subsidizes it at 65% or so. And right now we brought about $18 million into Colorado. So with these next 200, and I'm hearing a lot of these RFPs and everything else are kind of going out unilaterally, we are going to put on our RFP criteria, because we don't have to take the lowest bid, we have to take the most cost-effective bid. The criteria is going to be based on past performance as well. And so incumbents who, for whatever reason, actually cost more to do business with than they actually bid on, that will be factored into any sort of RFPs that we award going forward. And so obviously, our desire is that we can create competition in the marketplace. We know we have to get enough critical mass through anchor institutions to have the build out, but once we get that, we want to be able to create that competition. And by doing that, stabilize some of these prices. And it's kind of a shell game in our opinion, that, it's kind of like Sealy and Serta and Posturepedic. We don't know. It's the same damn mattress, but it's different prices. And we have carriers in facilities actually bidding against each other's departments. And so one department can actually undercut another department's bid by the same as well. So there's lots of confusion in the marketplace, I think purposeful. And if you folks who are in these regions and LDPs and whatever are issuing RFPs, if you talk maybe to your contiguous regions and say, we're going to time this together to see what we can leverage. And then if there are opportunities for us when we issue ours to kind of glom onto that and create some leverage as well, we're more than happy to do that.
And I think one of the, this is where some general knowledge is important, because, under ED's program and the FCC program to do the telehealth, the money that goes in there has to go to telemedicine. So they can't, the clinic that Ed hooks up to can't turn around and say, we're going to offer, free Wi-Fi to some people, or we're going to put up a tower and offer some wireless service, because that facility, that money has to go towards healthcare. But what you do know is if Colorado Telehealth Network is incenting a company to go in and put the facilities, get to a clinic, then okay, at least the facilities are in my community. If they tell Ed, yes, Ed, we're going to put fiber in to get to this clinic in a small community, then if you guys are working with Ed, then okay, this provider we know has fiber to this clinic. And while we can't use their lit service that they're paying for out of the Colorado Telehealth Network, you can then go to that provider and say, okay, I know you've laid facilities to this clinic, so let's talk about, Ed stuff is their stuff, but you've probably laid more facilities than Ed needs, so let's work together to do that. So that's where I think it's important to understand these different programs. People say, well, why can't you just give me internet? You're getting cheap internet. Well, Ed has to play by the rules the FCC set. So that's what he's doing. That doesn't mean we can't, dovetail on things. and help build things out. Yes, Deb?
I just have one comment here. A friend of mine just had surgery on her brain. She had some complications afterwards. They had to call in a hematologist. Her daughter, who lives in New York City, had to contact the hematologist and the neurologist because their electronic records didn't communicate with them. She would have to call one doctor, get a report from him, and then communicate it to the other physician. That seemed absolutely unbelievable to me. So I just wanted to communicate that to you. And hopefully, if these systems develop, we could do something about that, because that was I mean, this woman was in critical condition. And here's her daughter in New York City communicating between two highly trained physicians. And that's a lot of legal liability for this poor young woman who's left caught in the middle.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to communicate that to you, how tricky this whole
That falls
operation
in
is.
the health information exchange. Their water they swim in, and that is the Carrillo and QHN here in Colorado. Those two health information exchanges, HIEs, are responsible for the EHR.
So any other updates from local entities, certain, any LTPTs or local efforts, anyone else before we take a quick break and get into some of our canned presentations? Anyone else want to provide an update on what's going on in their area?
How about your update?
My update? Well, my update's going to be. All right, so we're thinking of just a quick break, get the presentations going here on the screen. We've got some pop and some cookies back there, back there. So let's just take 5-10 minutes, and then we'll get going again. So the folks on the phone, you can probably just stay dialed in. We'll be back in about 5-10 minutes.
I didn't understand the word that you said. That's okay. With what you're doing. Okay.
How are you?
How you doing?
Good.
Doing okay?
Yeah.
Hanging in there? Running around the state?
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet. We all are.
It's kind of a obstacle course over here.
Hey, Robin.
Hey, how are you? Yeah, I have
This is my backyard. I can't believe it.
Yes, in your back.
Yeah, this is nice.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. It is.
Making sure.
No, we've been looking to
This is
and
Denver.
so
It just seems
it's going to change
with our technology, they can work and that's, and they made it so that, and that's so they can get more progress.
Oh, I'm not gonna, yeah.
That's a good thing I know why. It's in most places, they branching
They can't be much usually that's tough. They can.
And then all we have to do is
Just get.
we put the server in our office.
I think I need to.
How well that would our grandma, you don't hear all of them.
There we go. Then I think. There we go.
Well, maybe we provide this is the first game.
Okay.
Rural area.
Screen share. Got it.